They said swans meet for life, but no one truly understood what that meant until Luna. When her partner died, she refused to fly away. Through storms, through winter, through loneliness, she stayed. Because sometimes love doesn't end, it just waits. The lake woke before the world did. A fragile mist floated above the water, like breath held between night and dawn. The air was cold enough to turn each ripple into a whisper, every sound into an echo. And in that stillness, that quiet so deep it could hold a prayer, a cry rose through the fog. It was soft at first, then long and aching, like the sound of something breaking that didn't want to break. It was a swan's cry. Her name was Luna. For as long as anyone could remember, Luna and her mate, Sol, had been the soul of Lake Windermere, a pair of swans who moved as one, whose wings caught the sunrise together, whose reflections danced on the silver water like two halves of a single heartbeat. They were never apart, not for a moment. Every dawn as the sun rose and painted the lake gold, you could find them gliding side by side, their necks forming perfect arcs, their bodies cutting smooth paths through the still water. Their devotion had become a quiet ritual for the townsfolk who lived around the lake. Children tossed breadcrumbs from the wooden pier, old couples sat hand in hand watching them. Even the fishermen, hardened by years of labor, softened when they saw the pair drift past. They're like love itself, people would say, pure, gentle, forever. But forever, as the lake would soon remind them, is a word that only nature dares to challenge. It began one cold morning in late autumn. Sol was slower than usual. His wings drooped, his strokes against the water grew weaker. He no longer lifted his head proudly. Instead, it hung low, his feathers dull against the fading light. Luna stayed close. She nudged him softly, preened his feathers, and called to him with those long melodic hums that only swans can make. He would answer, faintly, and she would echo it, a conversation of devotion. But the rhythm of their dance began to break. By winter's first snow, Sol could no longer swim far. The rangers noticed. They watched the once glorious swan struggle to cross the lake that had once been his kingdom. And when they saw him falter, they knew they had to intervene. That morning, two men arrived in a small rescue boat. They spoke gently, their voices low, as if aware they were intruding on something sacred. Luna grew restless, circling Sol protectively, spreading her wings in defense. She hissed softly, her heart frantic, but the men moved carefully, guiding Sol into a wooden crate lined with straw, covering him with a blanket. Luna followed, crying, a sound that pierced through the cold like a knife through glass. The boat drifted toward the shore. Luna followed, her body cutting through the water, desperate to keep up. When the van drove away, she ran alongside the path, flapping her wings, calling, her voice chasing the fading sound of the engine until it was gone. Then, she stopped. She stood still, chest rising and falling, breath trembling in the frost. And when silence returned to the lake, she lifted her head and let out one final cry, long, broken, endless. That night, the world around Lake Windermere went quiet. Snow began to fall, soft and slow, covering the ground like a white shroud. And somewhere far away, Sol's heart stopped beating. When the rangers returned days later, Luna was waiting. She had not left the water. They carried with them a small urn. The lake was still, the trees bare, the air sharp with the scent of winter. They scattered Sol's ashes into the water, and for a moment, the surface glimmered in the pale sunlight, as if his spirit was kissing the lake goodbye. Luna watched. She didn't move, she didn't cry. She simply stayed there, her neck curved, her gaze fixed on the spot where his ashes had fallen. When the last ripple faded, she glided to the center of the lake, the place they had always rested together, and settled there, alone. From that moment, Luna stopped flying. The other swans left as the cold deepened. They took to the skies in elegant formations, their wings slicing through clouds, chasing the warmth of the south. But Luna stayed. She refused to leave. Days turned to weeks. The lake froze at the edges, forming a fragile mirror around her. People came and went, bringing food, scattering seeds, trying to coax her closer to shore, but she never came. She would drift towards them briefly, then turn back towards the middle of the lake, to the place that still held the ghost of her mate. Every morning when the mist was thickest, Luna's voice would rise through it, those long, mournful calls that echoed across the hills. To the village. "She's calling for him," an old woman whispered one morning, her eyes wet. "She doesn't know he's gone." But maybe she did know. Maybe that's why she stayed. Winter deepened. Ice crept farther out across the lake until only a small patch of water remained unfrozen. A small, warm spring fed from under the ground. It was there that Luna made her stand. She would circle that open patch endlessly, dipping her head into the cold water, sometimes resting her neck across her back, her feathers dusted in frost. The villagers grew attached to her. Children named her the Waiting Swan. They left food along the frozen edge, whispered goodnight to her as they passed by. And then came the morning when young Elliot, the baker's grandson, saw something extraordinary. The lake was still, the mist thick as smoke. Luna sat motionless in the center of the unfrozen water, her reflection shimmering faintly below. But next to her, there was another reflection, faint, white, translucent. Another swan. Elliot rubbed his eyes, but the image didn't fade. The two shapes floated side by side for a moment before the mist swallowed them. He ran home breathless, shouting, "Grandma, I saw them! I saw both of them!" And the old woman smiled sadly, touching his hair. "Maybe you did, my boy," she said softly. "Maybe love never really leaves. It just changes its form." The story spread. People began visiting the lake again. Not out of pity, but reverence. They brought candles, left flowers, and spoke in hushed tones. Some said they saw Saul's spirit gliding beside her in the early dawn. Others said they heard two swans singing together through the fog. Whatever it was, one thing was certain. Luna was never truly alone. The winter stretched on. Storms swept through the valley. There were nights when the wind screamed through the trees and snow fell so thick it blurred the world into white. Yet when morning came, Luna was always there, fragile but unbroken, her feathers glowing like a lantern against the gray. When spring finally came, it was as though the world exhaled. The ice cracked and melted, releasing the lake from its frozen stillness. The air smelled of earth again. The trees unfurled their first buds. But Luna, she was weaker now. The long winter had taken from her what it could. Her feathers had lost some of their shine, and her movements were slower. Still, she glided through the water with the same quiet grace, as if love itself kept her afloat. Then one morning, something new stirred across the lake. A young swan, a male, with gray-tipped feathers and cautious eyes. He had come from the far end of the river, alone, curious. He saw Luna and stopped. Then he swam closer. At first, Luna ignored him. She turned away, uninterested, her heart still bound to what once was. But he didn't leave. He followed at a respectful distance, copying her movements, never intruding. Days passed and he remained, like a quiet shadow. When Luna rested, he rested. When she swam, he swam. When she called out, he answered softly, hesitant, as if asking permission to share her silence. The villagers watched. "Maybe she'll accept him," they whispered. "Maybe love can begin again." And slowly it did. One morning, the two were seen gliding side by side, their necks arching in rhythm with the sunrise. It wasn't the same, how could it be? But there was something beautiful about it nonetheless. Luna had found a companion, not to replace Saul, but to honor him. The lake that once echoed with loss now shimmered with life again. The story of the waiting swan spread far beyond Windmere. People came from neighboring towns to see her, to see the swan who had defied the cold, who had waited for love long after it was gone. Photographers captured her on quiet mornings, her white feathers glowing gold beneath the dawn light. Poets wrote about her. artists painted her. And somewhere beyond words and songs, Luna lived her quiet life, graceful, serene, eternal. Years passed. Seasons came and went. The lake grew busier with tourists and quieter with age. Luna and her new mate stayed together, raising a small brood of cygnets one summer, tiny gray balls of fluff that followed her in a perfect line across the water. She guided them gently, patiently, and protectively. And yet, when dusk came, when the mist rose from the lake, she would always drift back to the same old spot, the place where Saul's ashes had fallen. She would linger there in silence. No calls, no movement, just stillness, as if remembering. And in those moments, when the sky turned pink and the water glowed like glass, if you looked closely enough, you might see two figures reflected there, one real, one faint, gliding together through the past. When Luna grew old, her feathers thinned and her body weakened, but her spirit remained unbroken. She never left the lake. Even when she could no longer fly, even when she could barely swim, she stayed. Locals said she was waiting for something, or someone. One summer evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the water in molten gold, she swam to the middle of the lake. She floated there for hours, her head resting softly on her back, her eyes half closed. And as the last light faded, Luna slipped beneath the water, quiet, peaceful, as if carried away by the same breeze that once lifted her wings beside Saul. The next morning, her body was found, gently drifting near the rock they had shared. The lake was still. The air was heavy with silence. The villagers buried her by the shore, beneath the willow that leaned over the water. A small wooden plaque was placed there. It read, "Luna and Saul, together again." And so the lake that once knew sorrow became a place of love, remembrance, and peace. Swans still come to Lake Windermere every year, nesting among the reeds and raising their young. On misty mornings, if the light hits just right, you can still see two white figures gliding side by side, reflections that never fade. People say it's Luna and Saul, reunited at last, their souls bound by the water they once called home. The wind carries their whispers through the trees, the ripples move with their rhythm, and the lake, their eternal witness, keeps their love alive. Because love, real love, doesn't end when one heart stops beating. It doesn't vanish with time or distance or death. It becomes something else, quieter, deeper, eternal. And for those who stand by Lake Windermere in the soft light of dawn, listening to the call of the swans, it's impossible not to feel it. That invisible thread that binds two souls beyond life, beyond loss. Luna refused to leave because she knew what many never learn, that some loves are not meant to fade. They are meant to echo, to remain. And sometimes, when the morning mist lifts and the world falls silent, you can almost hear her whisper through the air, "I stayed, I waited, and now we are one again."